Welcome back, everyone. In the last video, we learned how to utilize our collections query. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use a different query where you can pass it a variable inside of our code. Now, we've already seen our collection query by ID, but inside of our application, there's a chance that we don't actually have the ID. What we do have is a URL parameter that contains the actual title that we can also query by. And you'll notice that I made you this method, getCollectionsByTitle. So I know it says collections plural, but really it's singular. When you look at the definition, it's a single collection. And what you pass to it is a title string. So the title is what has to match. So in order for us to use this new method, first of all, we're going to update our variable from ID to title. And then the actual value will use hats, which we know is a working title. Then what we'll do is update the actual variable in the query to title. And from an ID, it goes to a string. Then it's just a matter of updating this collection from title to our title variable. And then instead of collection, we need getCollectionsByTitle as the actual method. And now once we have this, we can fire this off. And we'll notice that we get the appropriate data, but it's mapped under this getCollectionsByTitle. The key thing, though, that we want is really this query. So what we're going to do is take this query in order to understand how it is that it works. So let's go back to our application. Inside of our category code, we know that we have access to the title through the parameter category. So we want to utilize this category parameter as the variable that we pass in when we fetch for collection by title. Now, how do we do this? So first off, we're going to still need to leverage useQuery and GQL. So let's bring in the appropriate library. So it's at Apollo client. And here directly inside of this component, we can use GQL as well as useQuery. So essentially, by the independent component, we are not using the context anymore in order to fetch this value. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get rid of this useContext just so that we know what's happening inside of our code. I'm just going to remove this so that we know we have to replace all of this code anyways. And I'm just going to remove the useContext. So all we have so far is just the category, which we know is a string of the title that we need to update. Next, what we're going to do is we are going to first initialize in the use query. We're not going to talk about what we're going to do yet. We just need to make sure that we know the signature. So we know that we're passing into the use query some kind of GraphQL blob object. So here, I am going to say const getCategory is equal to GQL, and then the backticks. And inside, I'm just going to paste the full query blob that we had copied from our GraphQL playground. Now what we're going to do is pass that into useQuery. And in order to pass a variable in for title, we actually pass a second parameter to useQuery, and this is going to be a configuration object. Inside the object, you want to tell it with the key variables what the different variables that this blob can expect to see will be. So that will be another object. Now it's just a matter of passing the actual values into the query right here. So we can say that the variable that we're passing in is title. What is the title? Well, it's the category value. And then what do we get back from this query? Just like before, we'll get a loading state, any potential errors, as well as the data. And for now, what we'll do is we can just actually log out the values. So here, what I'm going to show you is I'm going to replace that with an empty array so that our code actually passes. And then I'm just going to console log out the data so we can see the shape. So let's save this. Let's go back into our application. And now we saw it. We got undefined, and then we get the object where the query is the actual name under which our data is nested. So here, going back inside of our code, we need to modify this data so that we can get the products, which is what we'll map through. In order to do that, we can say directly inside of a use effect, because we want to run a use effect whenever we want to modify our data. And we'll run it every time category changes and every time the data changes. And here we'll say if data, because as we know, data can be undefined, we're going to pluck off the get collections by title key, which is the name of our query. And off of this is going to be the full category. We only need the actual value. So here what we're going to say is that the items is what we want. These items are going to all be nested on this data object. And then it's just a matter of running set products on the items. So we're doing a nested destructure here. We're saying first destructure, get collections by title, and then off of this object, I want you to destructure off items. So it's a nested destructure in order for us to set up our flow of data. And now, if we save our code, we once again go back. Let's refresh. We see our loading spinner, and then we see our appropriate data. So that's it. The main key challenge in using this useQuery is just understanding that when you want to pass in these variables, it has to be passed into the useQuery hook. You're going to have to use some kind of configuration object under which you pass the variables as an object, where you then match the appropriate values to the appropriate parameters inside of your query. One of the advantages of using this independent query style, and as I mentioned before, that with GraphQL and Apollo, you actually replace Redux. The reason why is when we start looking at our fetch calls. And I mentioned earlier that there are caching that is happening under the hood. So let's look at our network tab and refresh. We see a bunch of requests for different files. The bundle here is the bundle of all of our JavaScript code. The CSS is all of our CSS relevant for this page. I want you to look down here though at this crown clothing one. The reason why I want you to focus on this one is because this is actually the call to our GraphQL server's URL. If you click on this, you'll notice that inside of headers, there's a couple with request options. The request options one, you don't have to worry about. It's mainly the post request one that is important, because if you look at the payload, we're getting back the actual value. So this is literally showing us our initial query and what we'll receive back from GraphQL server for the actual JSON payload. So this is the request itself. You'll notice though that we also have all of these different favicons and PNGs. The PNGs are the actual literal images. Remember that we pass them as strings, and then once React loads, it fetches the image from the respective URL passed. But now what I want you to notice is that if I navigate away, I want you to ignore all these other calls. Those are not important. If we go back to hats, you see that the only thing that we refetch is the images. We don't make another call to the crown clothing GraphQL server. The reason for that is because this query for this page has already been cached. GraphQL and Apollo know that we don't need to refetch this. I've already stored it. And the reason I don't need to refetch this is because the variables in the query hasn't changed. You're just giving me hats again. But if we go to jackets, there we see we make a new request. So again, the first one is the options. The second one is the actual request. And there in the payload, we see the actual values that we want. So you can imagine that if we go back to hats, notice how we just fetch the hat images, no GraphQL request. And similarly, we go back to jackets, again, just the images, not the actual GraphQL request. So again, we're just caching those values, and this makes our code much more performant. So if you were wondering earlier when we were on our hats and when we refreshed, why we saw that there were two sets of crown clothing fetch calls. Now the reason for this is because our context is still fetching the full list of collections. So we're making one request for the full collections from our category context, and then we're making an independent call to get collections by title inside of our category component. Remember, both are mounting, so two requests are going through. But as a result, what I want you to realize is that GraphQL and Apollo are not caching by the actual items. They're caching by the query, which is why even though we're fetching the full collections, we're still making a separate fetch for the independent collection, even though that collection lives inside of the bigger collections as a whole. So this caching does not happen at the item level. Again, let's go to sneakers. We notice that we make a call. We know these sneakers do live inside of our larger collections call, but we still made a fetch. So again, what Apollo caches is the query, not the actual items themselves. So that's an important thing to remember. So now that we understand how GraphQL works now and how caching works now, you can actually pretty much use this as the basis for interacting with Apollo for the majority, 80-90% of what you're going to do inside of your actual Apollo project in GraphQL. In the next video, I'm going to tidy this up and we'll talk about why you would prioritize using GraphQL versus a normal REST API, and then some of the advantages, disadvantages, as well as other things you can do. So I'll see you in the next video.